hope it's all set up and working.
It's all working, is it? Okay, well, I'll do what I can. Very good. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a massive pleasure to be talking to the UKIP annual conference again. I'm sorry there's been a gap of a couple of years, but there we are. It wasn't planned by me. I'm going to be talking about international trade policy. I'm an economist, as you probably all know. And it may come as a surprise to you, but Tim Congdon can be a passionate ideologue, revolutionary even. But my first task is a personal one, and that is to thank, with much warmth and sincerity, Gerard Batten for support of my 2010 bid to be leader of UKIP. Sorry I let you down, Gerard, but there we are. I'm not quite sure how to put this, but if I was lucky to have Gerard's support then, you are very much lucky to have me as leader now, much luckier. Immediately after the result of the leadership election, I promised Gerard that if he wanted to become leader, and if he became leader, then I would help him as far as I could. And I've made a small gesture in that direction. I hope, Gerard, that that's done something. Now, after the 2010 leadership election, Nigel Farage made me economic spokesman for UKIP, and I remained in that position until 2014. My main output in those 4 years for UKIP was this document here, which some of you may remember, How Much Does the European Union Cost Britain? And I updated annually. Gerard had set a precedent for this because he'd done the first one back in 2006. And he always contributed a forward to it, for which I was very grateful. Now, Gerard's view in 2006 was that our membership of the European Union cost about 6 or 7% of what we produced. And he arrived at this figure partly because the membership fee, 0.5%, 1% of GDP, varied from year to year and so on, but mostly because of regulation. Regulation particularly affecting small and medium-sized businesses, but actually affecting big businesses as well. And so, anyway, I sat down to work, didn't know exactly what to expect, and I arrived at a higher figure. I arrived at about 10% of GDP. And the explanation for the gap was that by the opening years of the 21st century, the European Union had become very protectionist. The world price of sugar, ladies and gentlemen, is a third of that in the European Union. That's the extent of the distortion. The gain of 3% was based upon when we leave the European Union, we can adopt free trade. Okay. Now, so that 3% GDP bonus arises because outside the EU, we can trade freely with any nation in the world, with people from other countries and so on, without restriction, I hope. What's all this about free trade? Well, it means exactly what it says. It means that, we can buy things from other countries as just the same as people in Norfolk can buy things from people in Yorkshire. Why do we have to worry about the fact that that way we get the best quality goods, we get them for the best price, and the government doesn't get in the way? The phrase I use here, and this perhaps is more provocative, is unilateral free trade. That means that our government, when we're outside the European Union, we're an independent nation, just declares free trade. There are going to be no restrictions on imports into our country, no tariffs, no quotas, that's that. It's very nice to have the applause, and I'm grateful. I tell you, this is going to be a very, very tough debate. And, of course, we're going through it at the moment, and as you'd expect, the Tories are in a great muddle. Anyway, it means that we do that regardless of how other governments react, all right? No tit for tat, none of these little zero-sum games trying to be clever compared with other nations. We just open our borders not to people, to goods and services, all right, to competition. Some people say, well, No, we must protect something. Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a marvelous thing called the British Empire. And it included, in Asia, 2 small islands, 2 little dots on the map of the world, colored pink. And they differed from the surrounding areas in that they enjoyed respect for property, rule of law, and absolute free trade. They enjoyed absolute free trade by treaties. They were called treaty ports. In effect, free trade was part of their constitution. One of these 2 little islands was called Singapore, and the other Hong Kong. When we left, they kept free trade. Ladies and gentlemen, these 2 little islands have been the most successful, economically successful little nation states, city-states, what do we call them, of the last 150 years. The growth of living standards, incredible. As you know, Hong Kong sits in the lap of China. After Chairman Mao died in 1976, it took a few years for a new leader to emerge, but he was very different from Chairman Mao. Deng Xiaoping said, it doesn't really matter what you call a cat is black or white. What it matters is it catches mice. It doesn't matter whether you call your policy communist, capitalist, or whatever, as long as it works. And he saw next to the Republic of China, the Communist Republic of China, this little thing called Hong Kong. You may not believe this, the little island, a little bit around the town of Hong Kong, that had international trade in the late 1970s larger than the entire Republic of China. And Deng Xiaoping said, well, this is crazy, let's copy them. And so he set up the special export zones in China. They worked on the same basis as Hong Kong. Complete free trade, low taxes, light regulation. They boomed. And then this spread across all of China. Unilateral, this wasn't imposed on China by overseas, but by the Americans. This is something they did themselves. It was unilateral, all right? Today, the increase in output per head in China since 1980 has been 20 times. I sometimes hear from, well, Gerard actually, but we're friendly about it all, that I'm being ideological on all this. Well, no. Can you imagine anything more practical than the benefits of a policy of this sort for so many hundreds of millions of people that just transformed the world that we live in? That's why I'm in favor. This is just one story. There's many more other stories I could tell. This is why I'm in favor of unilateral free trade when Britain leaves the European Union. Now, my time is quite limited, and have I got minus three minutes left? Or? Okay, wonderful. Well, I tried to limit the speech to the 12 minutes I was allotted, so I may have an embarrassing problem. Anyway, let's see how we go. So I said, in the last 4 decades, you had China copying this little colony that then was Hong Kong, opening itself up. And now it's got, some measures, the largest GDP in the world. And of course, the result of this is that the share of other continents, other nations, in world output's gone down. And of course, that's quite important to the kind of world we're living in. I'm not quite sure if you can see up there. This slightly went wrong with the sending off the PowerPoint to my fault. Up the top there, but we can't see the labels, you can see the share of the European Union in world output in 1980, 30%. Obviously, dominant for us in a sense, they're our neighbors. That has fallen since then to, well, around about 15, 16%. And then that very last slide, zip at the bottom, is down to 12.8%, because we're leaving. Okay? So the last figure there is for 2020, and it's about 12.5%. It's gone from 30 to 12.5. I take it that many of us are grandparents. Look around the room and there's a lot of grey hair.